Hi, my name is Audrey. I'm the public historian here at Oatlands. And one of the people we do mention fairly often, but we don't often delve into the story for, is a man named John or Jack Gleed. And Jack was enslaved prior to emancipation, and after emancipation was able to buy a piece of land not very far from Oatlands. Being one of the first people to buy a chunk of land in that area, the community that formed around that property came to be known as Gleedsville. It is still there. It is still a community. There is still a church that was built in about 1890, still an active cemetery there. But Jack himself had a bit of a rough time of it. In 1870, we see him in the census living with a woman named Lucinda. Unfortunately, in 1874, Lucinda died of tuberculosis. Incredibly common, fairly contagious, and it wouldn't be until about the 1950s that a cure was developed. That's a whole other rabbit hole to go down. But after Lucinda passed, he remarried to a woman named Virginia Buchanan. Virginia is actually the daughter of his next door neighbors, Robert and Mahala Buchanan. And if you've been on one of my tours, you may have heard their names before. They're the parents of Martin Van Buren Buchanan. Now, he's the only person we know for sure from Oatlands served with the Union Army during the Civil War. There may be more, we just haven't found the records for them yet. But we know that Martin served in the 2nd United States Colored Troops. He signed up in September 1863 and was discharged in January 1866. That's a little bit beside the point. His parents were Jack's neighbors, and Jack ended up marrying one of their daughters, Virginia. Unfortunately, Virginia passed away not long after in 1881. She also died of tuberculosis, and to make it even worse, just about 6 months before Virginia died, their daughter Mary, who was just a couple of years old, also died of tuberculosis, which at that time was often called consumption. If you've seen the movie Moulin Rouge, you're probably familiar with that kind of hallmark symptom of tuberculosis, which is the coughing up blood, what they call bloody sputum. I know it doesn't sound great. And it's not fun to experience because basically what happens is your lungs deteriorate to the point that the disease consumes you. This is where they get the term consumption. Well, it's a few years after Virginia passes until Jack remarries, and he marries a woman named Mahala Buchanan. Not his neighbor, Mahala, her daughter, Mahala Ann. And by this point, Mahala and Robert, the elder Mahala, have passed, and their property is descended to their son, Martin. So Jack and Martin are now neighbors. Jack has married another of Martin's sisters, Mahala Ann, and this time his wife will outlive him. By 1900, we see that the two of them have been married for about 10 years, but this time Jack is actually living with Martin and his wife, Amelia Massey. We don't necessarily know why, for sure, or I should say, I don't know why, because there's a difference between what we can see in published and official documentation and what families know and what stories have been passed down through generations. And it's important to remember that while official documents like the federal census can be incredibly helpful, in fact, death records tend to have a lot of detail to them, including parents, where your parents were born, where you were born, if you were married, what exactly happened that caused your death, who was the informant, who may be a daughter, a sister, a son, a husband. For all of this information, what that doesn't give you is what the family might know. Things like the fact that Mahala Gleed was very well dressed. And we know that because of oral histories. We know because people told us, people who remembered her. So, that all being said, we know that Jack died before 1910. We don't know how he died, but I think it's probably safe to assume that he is buried in the Gleedsville Cemetery, which, as I said, is still active, still tended and cared for by the family members. But his wife, Mahala, would live until 1933, when she died as a result of the flu. She was also buried in Gleedsville Cemetery. People who know me know that my stories tend to be incredible downers. And this story is kind of a downer, too. He lost multiple wives, his only daughter, at least that I know of. But remember, too, that Jack was able to, after emancipation, after gaining his freedom, purchase land and own that land, run that farm, sustain his family. And that's fairly impressive given the restrictions that he grew up under and the fact that he was never allowed to read as an enslaved person. He was never allowed to be taught literacy. He was still able to buy land, to run his property, to run his family, and to keep his family cared for as long as they lived. That is a success, and that's the important part, I think.